Monster House presents.
It's actually quite unlike anything we've ever seen before.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man.
In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland. It's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster.
Monster Talk.
Welcome to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
Hey there, Monster Talkers. Karen is still out on vacation, but we'll be back after this two-parter. I was planning to talk with Richard Hatem, who is the screenwriter for the Mothman Prophecies, about his new podcast, but I wasn't sure when I was going to get that scheduled. And then I ran into some logistic issues due to Karen's travel and my move to our new advertising platform. And Richard super kindly agreed to hop in for a quick 30-minute chat, which then sprawled out into this really fun and wide-ranging discussion that went for a full hour. Now, I really enjoy Richard's new show, which we will be talking about in this discussion, and a link to it's in the show notes. It's called Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf. It's produced through the Astonishing Legends Network, and it's not at all what I expected, yet I still really enjoyed it. I bet you will too. You can easily find it in any podcast platform by searching for it, but there's also a link in the show notes here, along with a link to some fun, weird stuff that Richard introduced me to in this discussion. So here is part one, and we'll be back with part two on Labor Day.
Monster Talk.
So I'm having you on today to talk about your new show, which I loved.
Yay, thank you.
Season one was great. This is Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf. But if you just think it's a bunch of book reviews, that's not what it is. It's you've managed to incorporate, I think, a extraordinarily well-written amount of biographical content into the shows, which gives it an emotional weight that a book review show would not have. So it's really great.
Well, thank you. And it happened totally by accident. So what happened was so about if we're in August, so this is like a year ago spring. So this is just before the writer's strike in the summer of 2023. Okay. And the ASSAP UK got in touch with me. And I know some of the people from the group, and I had spoken to the group before, but they got back in touch and basically said, "Hey, do you want to come and just talk to our group?" It's the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomenon UK, yeah. And they're really fun, and they go back decades, and they're a group you'd probably like because they're not like super advocates, and they're not like, rabid in terms of anything other than having a good time, having a larf.
Yeah.
Because it's British.
Yeah.
And having a drink and then talking about this stuff, but they're very willing to sort of hear all sides of it. You mean
they're basically reasonable people? That's so weird. How do they keep membership?
I don't know. That's how they're posing. So I don't know how they're pulling it off.
I love it.
Yeah. And they have people come and speak. And so of course I was speaking on Zoom, and they're like, "You can talk about whatever you want." And so the first time I just talked about Mothman, and that's easy because, I just talk about my experience. But then they were like, "Well, why don't you come on and talk about a supernatural subject?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's great." But then I was like, "Oh, wait a second. Like, this talk is going to go on for like an hour. And I don't know any supernatural subject well enough to speak extemporaneously on it for an hour." So even after a subject was landed upon, and the subject was the Spiricom.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I think I've heard of this. Okay, but what is it? Because I don't want to claim that I know exactly what it is. I just know I've heard the term before. A quick honesty insert. I told Richard after this interview, I had thought I had heard this term before, but after he began to describe it, I had not. I think I was thinking of something like Spear's new motive power God machine from the spiritualism days, or maybe that equipment that John Hutchison used on video to pretend that he could cancel gravity. But it was none of those things. It's something much more interesting to me. Stand by.
So the Spiricom is this thing that was developed in the 70s. And the idea was it was EVP to the next level. It was a device that could facilitate a two-way, like, shortwave radio conversation between a living person and a dead person.
Okay. Do you remember who developed it?
Yes, it was developed by a guy named George Meek, and he was a tech head.
Yeah.
But he had no mediumistic abilities, and he was basically looking for someone who was sort of an electronics genius, but who was also a medium, thinking that could sort of help bridge the gap, because then that person could get in touch. Step one would be, you're a medium who's also a tech head. So we found a guy named Bill O'Neill. And the logic was, okay, use your mediumistic abilities to find a ghost on the other side. Establish a connection, and then start working with the ghost on developing the machine.
Nice. That's wise. What?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's this, airtight logic, right? And so Bill O'Neill did manage to communicate with someone who was also an electronics radio nerd on the other side, and establish contact. And then the idea was that the two of them together worked on this device until it's like, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And then one day the voice came through, and it was Dr. Mueller, who was the ghost on the other side. Okay.
This is a great story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you will be very pleased to know that I went ahead. And I've known about the Spiricom for decades. So I wrote this 35-page presentation where I basically talked about the entire history of the Spiricom, but also talked about my history when I first heard about the Spiricom when I was a teenager, back at my parents' house, in 1980 or whatever it was, 83. And then sort of worked my way backward and forward through my life and my discovery of a book that was written about the Spiricom and all this stuff, all the way up through today, in which the Spiricom has more or less been debunked, and debunked in a really interesting way. And so I sort of take the story all the way through my era of belief, and then my late discovery that there is almost no evidence supporting that this thing ever worked, and specifically because they put all the specs out and they said, everyone else build this machine and try to do it.
That's very scientific. That's exactly what you should do. Yeah.
Yeah. And no one was ever able to do it. The problem was Meek also didn't keep a real strict eye on Bill O'Neill. And Bill O'Neill, while I do believe was a medium and was able to communicate with the dead, at a certain point, I think he just fudged the Spiricom and began doing it on his own. And it's so funny because he released early videotape. I mean, picture video from the mid 70s, early 80s of him in his barn where the Spiricom setup was. And he's talking to George. And of course it sounds like this. He's like, oh, Dr. Mueller, are you there, Dr. Mueller? And Mueller's like,
That's very authentic sounding. It really is. It's like I'm not going to keep interrupting Richard, but this is an actual clip from a Spiricom session.
I haven't been able to hear you or see you, sir. Oh, I see.
And there's all this videotape of him having this two-way conversation. But two things. One, his back is always to the camera. So it's shooting at him facing the setup. So you never see his mouth.
Yeah. That's the best setup for ventriloquism. It really is. When you never face the audience.
Right.
The dummy turns around and.
Well, hey, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy had a huge radio career.
They did. I love that so much. This is astounding, family. Everybody gather around the tube. Look, this is incredible. Hey, he's drinking a glass of water. How's this done? What?
I know. I mean, nothing really captures the magic of ventriloquism like radio.
It really is the best medium for it, right?
So anyway, so you never see his face. Often his right hand is not visible, so it's like, oh, that he was holding the the voice modulator, and but then going through the internet and all the people commenting who've been commenting for decades and tearing this stuff apart. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong, and all this stuff. Finally, someone provided an argument that stunned me. And I started reviewing all the clips I'd ever seen or heard. And their argument was so simple. It was simply, here's the problem. You never hear them talk at the same time.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Right.
And if he had thought it through, he could have pre-recorded, but why bother? Yeah, he already.
and there were and you would think, because the notion was that the communication was so, just barely able, and the other problem is you don't notice it because that tone, there's this sort of like buzzing tone that's coming out of the Spiricom at all times, and then is being manipulated by the ghost voice, or at least that was always the theory. So you're always hearing this buzz, even when only Bill O'Neill is talking. And so he's talking, but there's this, and then the turns into, and so it doesn't occur to you that they're not talking over each other until someone mentions it. And then you listen and you're like, oh my God, of course they'd be talking over. You and I have talked over each other.
Exactly. And we can see each other. Yeah.
In the course of this Zoom, and we're both alive.
Well,
as far as I know.
Allegedly. Right. Yeah.
If you call this living.
Yeah.
Anyway, all of which is to say, I wrote this thing. I delivered my talk to the ASSAP. I answered questions. We had a blast, and then it was over. And this was May of 2023. And then I was sort of like, oh, it's kind of a bummer. It's like I worked on this thing for a few weeks, and then I just did the talk, and it's kind of over. And then serendipitously, Susan had said, oh, I went to this podcast, conference, and the paranormal podcasts are almost the most popular, way above talking about TV or film or anything like that. It sort of goes like the giant people, Joe Rogan, and then lifestyle wellness and gurus and meditation.
Where does true crime fall in there? Is it still
That's the next.
Okay.
Like true crime is real.
Thanks, Serial. Yeah.
and then, but paranormal is up there. So she's like, if you do a podcast, if Scott and Forrest, ever finally, get you to do it, it should not be TV talk. It should be, and then she's like fishing for something. She's like, it should be, Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf, and you just talk about your books. And I'm like, oh my God, I've already done it.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
I'm like, that's what I did 10 days ago.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can I do it again? And I'm like, well, of course I can, because every one of those books, I remember when I read them, what I was doing when I read them, how I felt when I read them. And it's a way, and I can sort of do autobiographical, just sort of storytelling.
And you're doing a great job. I got to say to my listeners, you're a really good writer. I mean that as a writer, you're really, obviously you work in this, but plenty of people work as writers and suck. I found it extraordinarily engaging. So, yeah, I think our listeners will too. So I really do. I highly recommend it, so.
That is amazing. I really appreciate that. It's really funny. I've got friends who have known me for 40 years and they're like, "Oh, I was listening to you talk about, your when you proposed to Susan or, when you got divorced or some story." And they're like, and I already know the story. And I'm sitting in my car going, "Oh my God, what's going to happen next?"
Exactly. It's got a tremendous amount of emotional, content. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, it's got emotional weight. And if you just reviewed the book or just talked about the concepts in the book, that would not be there. In fact, I mean, look, let's see. This is my paranormal bookshelves. Okay. So I'm sure yours are, I'm sure you got more, but that's, I'm very happy with it. It's a nice collection. And that's just I call them my kooky real books, That's like, if we get into ghost stories, it's all over there. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. So
wait, so one shelf is, okay, this is
potentially real and then guaranteed nonsense. I mean, this is like, admittedly fiction,
Oh, okay. There's a bookstore out here in LA in Burbank, called Dark Delicacies. And
that's
Susan,
a great
out.
title. That is a great name for a place. Yeah.
It's a great name. It's a great place also. And a lot.
Do they have coffee or coffee adjacent?
Oh, they should, right?
Yeah, man. That's my two things: coffee and books. That's
yeah. Yeah, me too, except 3 things plus booze.
Well, I got booze, but you never can get that at the bookstore, or at least not around here. You can't. Yeah.
Well, we're going to that's the big venture. Susan and I are like, we've got to open the bookstore bar.
Dude, that would rock. I mean, who would not want that? That's fantastic. Yeah, no, you should totally do that. Sold. Yeah. Right.
And of course, and we love coffee too. So Susan's like, well, during the day it'll be coffee, and then at a certain point it'll sort of we'll open the bar, and you can sort of do whatever.
I love it.
Like,
I love it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I need just one more money losing venture.
Yes, we all do. We all do.
Yeah. I think I can wipe us out. So
my local dispensary near here. Well, it's not mine, but I mean, there is a local
very well.
It's next to my Kroger. It's not my Kroger either, but whatever.
What would you be more embarrassed walking into?
Well,
being seen? Kroger.
Here's the beautiful thing. I don't know if you've picked up on it or not through talking to me, but I really love puns. They renamed. They added coffee to the mix, so they basically set up a coffee bar and dispensary, and they call it the Coffee Pot. Of course.
I love it.
It's so good, though. I mean, I go in there to get the coffee, and my kid's like, "Why are you going into the dispensary?" Like, I'm getting the coffee, right?
Yeah. Oh, but they put shit in the coffee, dude.
Well, that's what they said. I was like, no, it's really good coffee. It's really good coffee.
Really good coffee. I just when I regain consciousness.
I don't know. It's like I drink some coffee and then I just go to sleep, like coffee does,
Right. It always puts you to sleep and chills you out.
It's totally normal. So no, it's really nice. The Coffee Pot. They don't a paid endorsement, but a total endorsement. So yeah.
Well, so the goofy little bit on Dark Delicacies was. Susan says it's the only bookstore I've ever been to that has a section vampires, fiction, and nonfiction.
Fantastic. Dude, can I weird confession? Okay, I've been married just shy of 25 years, right?
Nice.
I think it was late last year that I realized my wife is a vampire hater. And I don't mean casually a vampire hater. I mean like hardcore hates vampires. I didn't even know that was a thing. And I was like, you should have disclosed this when we got married. She said, you should have asked before we got married. Oh. It's like, fair.
Well, okay, when you say vampire hater, meaning she fears vampires?
No, she hates them. As in, I made some kind of joke about The Lost Boys. She's like, I've never seen that movie. I was like, how could you not have seen The Lost Boys? She's like, I don't like vampires. I'm like, okay, but like no, I don't. I was like, no, really? You don't like any vampires? She likes zero vampires. She just hates vampires. And I've been I've explored this. Like I've been poking at her, trying to get more information out of her because it turns out she's like, well, they're stupid. Okay, well, that's not really a very clear explanation. It's like, well, what do you mean they're stupid? She's like, well, I mean, they have so many ways to kill them, yet everybody thinks they're sexy and awesome. That's dumb. Why would you want to be a vampire when there's like 500 ways to die? I mean, yeah, you live forever, but you can only be up at night, and everybody wants to kill you, and they have a million ways to do it. I'm like, wow, you really thought this through. It's like...
Jeez, all right.
I mean, no. She's a vampire bigot. She really hates vampires. She's hardcore about it. I mean, I really like. It's now become this super obvious. I married a vampire racist and didn't know.
Totally. Well, it's almost like she's upset because she thinks it's a poorly designed archetype of.
Her explanation was so nerdy, but she does not self-identify as a nerd or anything like that, so yeah.
Does she? I mean, is it like, but on the other hand, I love mummies or something?
No, she's not much of a monster fan, to be honest. You know what else she's not a fan of? She doesn't pick
the right guy.
She doesn't care for podcasts either. It's really interesting.
Wait, I in the background I see someone walking out the door with a suitcase.
Yeah, what's going on? Vampires, am I right?
You chalk another one up. Those vampires work in mysterious ways.
They really do. No, it's been. She likes zombies. That's her favorite monster is zombies. So yeah. Oh. So she's big on any kind of zombie movie. My God, Train to Busan. I don't know if you've seen that, but holy shit, what a ride! Dawn of the Dead.
No, I have not seen that.
Oh, if you haven't seen, dude, do yourself a favor. It's a Korean movie, Train to Busan. You will not regret it. It is balls to the wall the entire time. It's and you would think zombies are a tired and, worn out trope, but no, people still can be creative in that milieu. So yeah.
Well, Blake, what I like to do is take a worn out trope and put it on a train.
There you go. Should we explain that joke or just let it ride? I think.
Let it ride. When did Train to Busan come out?
Oh, just a few years ago.
Okay, good.
Let's see. To Busan, because my listeners, 2016.
Oh, good enough. Yeah.
It is superb. It is so good.
My 17-year-old son has very refined film tastes. He will only watch movies made after the year 2000 when films got good.
Well, that's when they really started to take off, right?
we had finally figured out the narrative form. We finally figured out, gripping storytelling. So he sticks to that. It's not even like I don't watch black and white films. It's like, don't come at me with the 90s or the 80s bullshit.
That's hilarious. He must love that Maltese Falcon poster. That's
he has no idea what that is. He's never focused on that ever. He's just whenever he's in my office, he's looking down at his phone. So it doesn't matter. He doesn't even know what I look like.
That's so funny. Yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah, I have 3 kids still living here, and one of them is a total hide in her room, hardly ever come out.
Vampire.
Yeah, pretty much. And my wife said, has Maddie done something today from the chore list? I'm like, dude, the sun's still up. It's like she hasn't out of bed yet. This may be contributing to my wife's vampire complaints. That's a possibility. But let's talk about your podcast a little more. Your last 3 episodes were about a book by D. Scott Rogo. So have you read much else of Rogo's work besides the Miracles book?
Yeah, the first one I read, which I cover in season 2, is Phone Calls from the Dead.
Nice. Okay. Nice.
And what I didn't realize about Rogo was that he was kind of a wunderkind. I mean, he got in as like a fan, like in his teens. He was like writing fan letters to parapsychologists. And then right out of college, he was publishing books. So even though he tragically died, I think at age 40.
He was young. Yeah. To me, I think. So.
Well, yeah. To me, I look back at 40 and I'm like, oh my God, that was.
Yeah. 40 is when I had to start wearing the reading glasses. And I'm like, 40 sucks. But actually, mid 50s ain't bad. I'm having a good time here. Yeah.
I kind of feel the same way. Yeah. I'm glad you said that. I feel the same way. But anyway, Rogo wrote a bunch of stuff. I haven't read all of it, but I've read that, and there might, and I have a few others. that I haven't really gotten into yet, but yeah, I mean, he's a big name for sure.
He is, and his death is tragic and mysterious. So it's like if I ever did any kind of a true crime podcast episode, which I can't even imagine doing a whole show based on that. The mysterious death of D. Scott Rogo is definitely something I'd want to cover. It is weird. It's a very strange story.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
sad.
I don't know. And I mean, horribly sad. They said pretty quickly that I'm talking about like the newspaper reports the next day, because he lived out here. He was just in the valley.
Yeah,
when he was murdered, and very quickly the cops and I think even his mom sort of said this had nothing to do with his work.
No, not at all. No. Yeah, yeah.
Get in some weird, paranormal place.
Right.
This was an act of violence. I'm not sure if they said it was random. I don't know if there was.
It seemed like an opportunity killing, like somebody. Yeah. But So here's the thing about him at that time. He was gay, and it was a time when I feel like when a gay person got murdered in the 80s, it wasn't given the same serious treatment, I think, that a regular, like listen to me, whatever, a not gay murder would be. I don't know. Like, there's nothing good about being murdered no matter what you're
murder.
A straight murder. It wasn't.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong. My assumption is he was not out. Like,
no, I don't. I'm not clear on that. You know what? What I like about Scott Rogo is he had, first of all, I was doing research on the ghosts of the Watertown, which was a big case for me that I really ran to ground. And I was very happy with all that work. And I researched it for decades. It haunted me since I was a kid. Going back to bookshelves, one of the first books I read about ghosts had pictures of the ghosts of the Watertown, these faces floating in the water off the side of a ship. And I've spent so much time researching that. I actually uncovered the uncropped photo. It was amazing. It was maybe one of the most important cases I've worked on. Not its significance to the world, but its significance to me. It was personally important to me. And I got one of my most important leads because D. Scott Rogo actually cited his sources and had a really good index and a bibliography. So I was able to use his material to take me further down the road to getting to the bottom of the case. So
that's great.
Even though we probably would completely disagree on whether it was a real ghost or not, I really appreciate his scholarship on that topic, So so him being murdered sort of haunted me because I grew up with a fundamentalist family, very, very religious, very conservative. And like you reveal in your story, my mom was clinically depressed, and I spent a lot of my time trying to fix her, and she used me as an emotional crutch. And, there was a lot going on there. But these spooky books, that they really were important to me. And I had to hide, my interest in the paranormal from my parents because they saw everything as demonology. Everything was demons, And so if I was interested in monsters and cryptozoology and all that sort of thing, they thought that was evil / demonic / easily explained through the Bible. Like spending time on it was a waste of time because they already understood the answers, right?
Right.
So it led me to live this sort of dual life, a secret life where, a lot of the things I was interested in, I had to hide from my parents. So I'm not gay, despite I think is Greg Proops. Greg Proops has this line. He says, I'm not gay, but I make no case for it. Right.
Right.
That's me in a nutshell. What it meant though, is like living this secret life and not wanting your parents to find out what you're into gave me a huge affinity for gay culture. Like I was always afraid my parents were going to reject me because I was interested in this stuff. And I hid it from them for years and years. And it was just, I was living this secret life. So my emotional connection to people who've also had to live secret lives has always been there. I was like, when I was in the Navy, I had so many friends who were gay and lesbian, but they couldn't say it. And we hardly ever talked about it. But, they could lose their jobs. They could get kicked out of the Navy. It could be dishonorable discharge. It was like there was serious consequences to being true to yourself. And that sucks. And so I always, when I learned about D. Scott Rogo, I was like, I felt this weird affinity from him, for like living a secret life, and like being interested in this stuff. So yeah, I just felt a strong connection, even though we were on the opposite side of the belief spectrum.
Monster Talk.
You've been listening to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
You just heard part one of my two-part discussion with Richard Hatem about his new show, Richard Hatem's Paranormal Podcast. If you enjoyed hearing us talk, then you'll probably enjoy his show. Check it out. In part two, we're going to go on a meandering look at more stuff about skeptics and believers and so much more. So hopefully I'll see you in a week. Monster Talk theme music is by Peach Stealing Monkeys. If you're hearing this, then you're definitely getting our new feed, and we thank you for staying tuned.
This has been a Monster House presentation.